Personal stories, universal impact, the power of investigative filmmaking. So oftentimes when people think about investigative, they think about documentaries that surround the lone whistleblower, global intrigue, or governmental malfeasance. But sometimes the investigation is closer than we think. It's in our neighborhoods, it's in our homes, it's even in ourselves. So this panel will explore films at the festival that take a deep dive into the personal that reveals the universal. On board, we have an esteemed moderator who I just met and I'm a fan of already. He just showed me some footage he took in Mexico and it was like beautiful. And I don't know if he had planned on making it a film, but I'm like, oh my God, you gotta make this into a film. But listen about his accomplishments. Russell Lee Sharman is a writer, filmmaker, and anthropologist. He has written for Hollywood since 2008, working for dozens of studios and production companies, including Warner Brothers, Fox, Disney, MRC, DeLine Pictures, 21 Laps, Participant Media, Montecito Pictures, and Real Effects. He is the writer-director of Apartment 4E, a feature adaptation of his stage play, as well as a number of award-winning short films. Double Exposure welcomes Russell Sharman.
Hello. Oh, thank you so much. And so now I get to introduce my panel. Which I feel terrible because we took up too much time talking about me. So I would love to welcome up to join me, so I'm not here all by myself, the producer of this amazing film that you're going to get to see on Saturday called The Mistress Dispeller, Emma Miller. Please join us. Also want to invite up the director of a short film that you're all going to see right after this panel. I'm going to make sure we're done so you can get over there, called A Shot at History. Please welcome Erika Cohn. And finally, we have a performer, filmmaker, pretty amazing film that you're going to get to see on Sunday called Fox Chase Boy. This is Gerad Argeros. All right, so we're in an interesting situation because these are all amazing filmmakers who have films in this festival that you've not seen because they haven't played yet. So I'm going to do my best to encourage you all to go see them because they're all stunning, stunning films. I had the great privilege of being able to see them so that I can prepare for this. So I am super excited to get to talk to them about their work and really to talk more about this idea of making things personal. One of the things that you will discover when you check out their films is that each one, in varying degrees, brings us into a more personal, more emotional connection to their subjects. When you probably could have taken a much more conventional approach to these stories, except maybe Gerad's. Gerad's is sort of, by definition, personal and vulnerable, which again, you will get to experience. So essentially what I'd like to do is sort of take each film in turn. We're going to show a clip just to give you a sense of the context, then we'll have a conversation about the choices that they've made in terms of making their projects so much more personal than perhaps we might expect. So let's start with a shot of history. Erika's film, do you want to speak a little bit about sort of what your film is about?
Sure, I'll give you a very brief introduction and then also encourage you, the film is screening at noon, so we will all do a massive kind of move together. So A Shot at History is about Dr. Nita Patel, who, along with her all-female team, created a COVID-19 vaccine. And after achieving this kind of success, goes back home to India to reconcile the parts of herself that she left behind and fulfill a childhood promise to her father.
धर्म सुनो दया सिंधु स्वेसाम श्रेयम परम गुरु अक्षर पुरुषोत्तम महाराज नी जय गुरु हरिमान स्वामी महाराज नी जय
Yes, this is a novel, a new coronavirus. We are still in the very early days of this.
Government as well as private hospitals running out of space.
New daily cases have now topped 200,000 for weeks straight.
I knew this is something really serious, and I wish it doesn't spread around and take many lives, but it did. When COVID hit, seeing people on a respirator resurfaced all of my memory from my childhood. I realized that this is my moment to fulfill a promise that I made to my dad. People shouldn't have to suffer like he did.
A little bit of a taste of this really wonderful short doc about Nina Patel. And again, this could have been, and it may even feel like this is what you're about to get, is a kind of conventional story about the discovery of a vaccine. But I think even there you get the hints that this is actually about a really incredible woman and her story. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the process for you in terms of how you decided to engage, her whole life story, her marriage, her childhood, and why you decided to take that more personal approach to what, again, could have been a conventional doc.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in this film you really understand, and I don't want to give too much away, but she made this promise to her father at the age of 5. Her father was suffering from tuberculosis, and she told him that she would dedicate her life to curing infectious diseases, and she did, and sacrificed a lot of parts of herself along the way, and it's really this beautiful moment when you achieve the kind of pinnacle of success. You achieve this dream that you've been working so hard to achieve your whole life, and then you pause and kind of realize all the steps that got you to this point, and perhaps some moments of trauma that are now coming up that you didn't yet confront. And so in this moment for Anita, who was really, just an incredible force of nature at the beginning of the pandemic, who assembled an all-female team, and that's not something that we heard about in the news and media. It was this really special moment for her to kind of pause and reflect, and this kind of, in this beautiful synergistic way, our team met her in this moment. And it wasn't about a COVID-19 vaccine. It was really about her life journey and her relationship with her husband and the relationship with her family and kind of the history of what brought her to this point today. And in this film, there's so many different themes of gender justice and racial justice and the American dream and the new immigrant story. And that was a story I really wanted to tell.
Yeah, and I'm going to resist the temptation to spoil too much as well, but there's a minor character in the film, Rhonda Flores, and it's a wonderful example of this idea of getting personal, right? Because it's this younger scientist who sees Nita as a kind of hero, but a tough boss. But the more Nita is vulnerable, I think in some ways the more it sort of opens her up to inspiration, which is interesting, that line between the walls we put up and the vulnerability.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of leadership, and Rhonda Flores is a scientist who was a tremendous kind of team member, a part of the creation of the vaccine, and she looks up to Nita as this incredible mentor, and it really goes back to the importance of representation. Rhonda talks about in the film that she didn't know as a kid. She wanted to be a scientist from the second she knew what that meant, but she didn't have any role models of people who looked like her, and to have Nita Patel as kind of her boss and mentor meant the world. And you see as kind of the film unfolds the importance of having a mentor and a boss and a supervisor who's really accessible and who really is vulnerable throughout that process of how their journey led to their kind of success as well.
So it's a fantastic film. I'm going to go through the rest of the films, then we'll have a sort of a more general conversation, but you should all check it out. I'll make sure we're done so you can get over there to see it. But that brings me to the next film I wanted to talk about, which is Mistress Dispeller. This is a feature documentary. We have Emma, the producer of the film. And this film to me, is a bit of a magic trick. When you watch it, you find, especially if you're a filmmaker, you find yourself just mesmerized by how the heck did they pull this off? How does this work? Because it's so intimate, because it's so personal, and you're all going to get to the treat of getting to see it on Saturday. And again, I feel like this is a film that you probably could have taken a very conventional approach. You're going to do a better job than I, but it's essentially about this burgeoning industry in China of consultants who will help break up your husband's affair, essentially. And the access that your team gets to this particular love triangle is, again, mesmerizing, and it's incredibly beautifully shot. It definitely needs to be seen on the big screen. But again, it could have been a conventional documentary about this really interesting industry. There were chuckles, people are interested, and yet we get this really deep dive into these relationships, this husband and wife and the mistress, in equal measure, really. So what was that process like for your team in terms of how you came up with that approach?
Yeah, so our director, Elizabeth Lowe, she is born and raised in Hong Kong. She went to college in the United States. She spent time in America. I feel like she sort of places herself in the world as someone who sort of bridges two cultures in certain ways. And I think what's really a guiding ethos for her was that, we wanted to make a film that was going to bridge a divide in a moment when I think there's a tendency for the West to sort of other China or to sensationalize this is something that happens over there. And so I think that something that was really guiding the entire process was how do we really ground this in something that feels universal? And what that meant was a love story that despite the sort of intrigue of an industry that doesn't exist in the United States is first and foremost centering real emotions that anyone can identify with, the desire to connect, the desire to be loved, the desire to have safety and stability, the sort of midlife questioning that many people do. And so we discussed very early on that rather than having this be something that was sort of a sort of more ethnographic gaze of a sort of industry, that the way to sort of center real experiences was to take a more intimate approach that allowed us to sort of experience the perspectives of the husband, the wife, and the mistress in this love triangle in equal measure. So having this kind of Rashomon structure was always the kind of guidepost in some way. Whether we were able to achieve that early on was a big question mark for us, as we can talk at some point about how we went about getting that access. But I think that having the personal approach was the way to ensure that it connected most deeply with audiences.
So why don't we show, I don't know if you have a clip from the film, so you can get just a taste of what this is like.
我是跟他说有一次喝酒喝晕了，他叫了个名字，我就点他了。
我没说手机的事。
没，我说可以吧？我说他叫了个名字，他自己叫出来了。他当时就懵了，他就傻了，他就啥都说了，你就当不知道就行了，他不让我跟你说。然后下来他跟他说，他说原来是这个意思。
他咋想的？他这个日子还想过不想？
他想过，我不是你别着急嘛，我觉得有希望，但是我不知道不了解那个女孩，我只有见完之后我才能跟您具体说。
我离远那个啥挺漂亮。
哎呀，那也不重要，那个有啥重要？你也挺漂亮的。
我老了。
啊，你回去一个字都别问，你交给我，你一个字都别问。
我不问，我不想问，我不想问。
行吗？
我不问。
中。
那你慢点。
那我走了啊。啊。
It's so good, y'all. Yeah, you have to check it out. And so that was Feifei, the mistress at that last. Yeah. So, and you probably got the same sense that I watched the clip first, and then I watched the film, and you may have had the same thought that I did, which is, okay, these are actors, right? There's no way that they got this. And so you actually have in your promotional materials a lot of disclaimers about these are not reenactments. So maybe you could speak a little bit to the process of how you got access and what that has been like to sort of make this case that it's real.
I'll also say that we premiered at Venice in September, and after the Venice and Toronto premieres, we went in and added additional language to sort of the disclaimer, at the beginning, being like, this was not scripted and reenacted, because I think it's sort of the way that it's shot, and I think just because it is so intimate, I think some people were like, this has to be fiction, and then we're sort of viewing and experiencing it differently. So access was really, it kind of came in steps, and I think we were really, really lucky that we built an incredible relationship with Wang Zhenji, they call her Teacher Wang, so she's the mistress dispeller, who's kind of this consummate professional, really sort of expert in this industry. And when our team first was introduced to her, she's so charismatic. She's this kind of incredible sort of expert into human psychology. I think that she's incredible at sort of building trust and sort of knowing what people need. And so the very first day that we filmed with her, she was able to get us access to be able to film the sort of final stages of a mistress dispelling case that was wrapping up. And that same day, we were able to film with a husband, a wife, and the woman that the husband was having an affair with. And in this moment, the husband cried, and he explained how he was feeling like there was these class differences between him and his wife, and it had sort of driven him away. It was getting at this larger social context of the way that there's been a lot of class, people moving from one class to another in China, and I just think we all felt our hearts sort of go out to everyone in that room and what they were grappling with, and that was all sort of facilitated by this, this amazing person, Teacher Wang, that very first day of filming. And so I think that was sort of the click for us, that if we were able to work with her and trust her process and trust the way that she was able to really build trust with people and clients that she worked with, we might be able to really follow a case and get access to everyone involved. But just because there is a certain amount of deception that's involved in her work, it was really tricky to sort of navigate how do we go about getting access to film here. And so there was a little bit of kind of initial withholding of information that was necessary, where Mrs. Lee, who's the wife that you see for a second in that clip, she reached out to Teacher Wang. She needed Teacher Wang's help. She discovered text messages that her husband had been exchanging with another woman. And she, I think, really wanted to sort of center her love story and share, I think sharing that, that these are problems that other people face. There was something that I think felt like an act of service, that, if this is successful and we end up kind of, finding a way back toward one another, other couples can see that it's possible. Other couples can sort of see that there's not necessarily shame around navigating marital crises. And so she was sort of on board with filming, and then both she and Teacher Wang approached the husband about participating in a film about love in China. It was sort of more general than this is a film about mistress dispelling, because he couldn't know initially that she was a mistress dispeller, and sort of tiered like that. But I think part of what causes that feeling of intimacy, and I think there's sort of a unique approach where we would create the space for people to have difficult conversations, and then often just give them privacy, set the camera, and leave the room. And that was, I think, really worked for this approach. That's not right for every film, but I think, if you see the film on Saturday, there's a lot of scenes that are these sort of static, locked-off shots where it's two people sitting and trying to express things to one another, or fumbling towards some sort of like confession or revelation or attempt at communicating something that they haven't really said out loud before. And although they were very aware that the camera was in the room, of course, and they knew that they were, participating in a film, having, I think, the privacy to be like, we will let this unfold, and we'll leave, and we'll give you the privacy to do that, I think allowed us to access something that felt kind of electric, and also what would normally be behind closed doors.
It's incredibly effective. if I could geek out for a moment, there was a moment, and again, you haven't seen it, but you're going to go see it. But there is a moment and it's early in the film, where Mr. Lee, as soon as the hint of an affair comes up, he looks right in the camera. And for a viewer and a filmmaker, it was just like a golden moment of, oh my gosh, he is aware. They're actually filming it. It was a beautiful moment. Anyway, you should all check it out. So I want to move on to Fox Chase Boy, Gerad's film. Gerad, before I say anything, why don't you tell us a little bit about it's a very multi-layered sort of experience, this film, and I want maybe you could speak a little bit about it, and we could show a little, and then we could talk.
Yes. So I grew up in a community in Philadelphia, Catholic church community, and one of the most prolific abusers in the Philadelphia Archdiocese lived in our parish, and he really did a ton of damage to a number of boys that were my friends and neighbors. And so I came forward in 1998 before 2002 in Boston, when the larger abuse crisis in the States broke. And so I kind of siloed that story most of my life, and then some of these guys that I grew up with that were dear friends of mine when I was very young, in 2016, the first one passed away from a life of addiction and in and out of prison and trouble, and then another young man, James Cunningham, that was Jimmy Spurl, Jamie Cunningham, committed suicide in 2017. The priest himself died in 2017 as well. He was found by a journalist, an investigative journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer, found him in Dallas. He he left his house, checked into a hotel, and was dead the next day. And then one of the subjects of the film, John Delaney, has since overdosed. He was one of the guys that I made the film with. So what I did was I went back to my community. I'm a performer and a writer and a stand-up comedian and a storyteller, and I went back to the community and retold the story, reframed it in the local firehouse in a back room at a bar. And I had been telling these stories that weren't necessarily addressing the abuse, but stories, very intimate stories from our community. And then it since has evolved into this film, which is the attention that it's getting right now is truly shocking. Is that good?
That's
okay.
Wonderful. We have a few things. I'm not sure what we're going to show. If there's anything you wanted to.
I'm not certain what they're going to show, but anything will be just fine.
This is about my body. This is about my body. Embodied experience, where you remember everything that happened. It's in your body. This is about trauma. I'm not out to destroy the idea that my 97-year-old grandmother has about Catholicism. I just want to be acknowledged that all the bad shit happened. Like, what's Jerry Argeros' show about? Yeah, I don't know, man. It's like he talks about being molested as a kid. And it's funny, though. It's funny. It's pretty funny. Not that part. That's not the funny part. There's like other stuff.
If somebody's waiting for me to talk about sexual abuse, they're sort of not listening for anything else other than sexual abuse.
What you're doing is amazing, and I don't think you realize, how powerful this is.
That flood of emotions hit me, and it was like everything that you were talking about, I lived it.
People are aware now.
Silence is how they win.
I just watched this film yesterday, and I can feel myself getting emotional just seeing the trailer. Highly recommend. It's on Sunday, I believe. You're screening your film. So obviously, this started as a live performance, which must have been an incredibly vulnerable, raw experience. And as you said, back in your home neighborhood, Fox Chase, and now it's a film. And I wonder if you could speak to sort of, first, what that process has been like to take something that you shaped as sort of a one-man show, a monologue, and then decided to expand that into a film. And what were some of the choices you made in terms of how you were going to make that translation?
So the primary thing that I entered into this process with was that I was sort of shepherding the story of these other guys. So I tried to maintain contact with all their families as I moved forward through the process. So that was very tricky. But I also knew that if you name a film Fox Chase Boy, you at least have one built-in audience, which is the people from Fox Chase. Like, they all wanted to come. I kind of just assumed, and they did. They showed up in droves, and it was truly, for me, like really kind of transformational, because the first performance, which I just put this thing on Facebook that said, like, I'm doing this thing called Fox Chase Boy. It wasn't yet a film. I didn't have any money. I just had somebody who agreed to let me use the space in their bar. And like, if everybody showed up, and people who I hadn't seen in 35 years, and friends of my sisters, and friends of my parents, and everyone knew, like, I had in 2017, a journalist came and spoke to me, and it was the first time, you know, I kind of imagined, again, that it would be siloed. It would only like stay, but the internet does not work that way. And so it was in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then it was sort of everywhere. So people had a general awareness of what I might be about to talk about, but they knew me as this guy that moved to New York to do stand-up. So they were also, I think, expecting a little bit of like lightheartedness on the periphery, which I did try to deliver, because it is a brutal story. It's been nothing, over the years, it's been really nothing but sorrow. And so this process that I entered into has now arrived at this spot where there's this very uneasy joy, because this is amazing. Like, coming here is amazing. We went to the Czech Republic with the film. It's been absolutely like dreamlike. But the core of it is this heartbreak. And so I kind of went at it going like, this is going to be a really dynamic performance environment, in that I knew what the last line was from the beginning. This is not out of some sort of like arrogance, but like I could see what the film could look like when I approached the filmmakers. I said, hey, like, if we get this might be something really compelling, because I had no experience of it. And one of the things that I wanted to do, which I feel like through the grace of all that is kind of good, is that I knew that this story existed in every place there was a church. If you go to the news clips, start with A and you'll find 5 cities, and go to B and you'll find Brooklyn and Baltimore, and if you go to C, like, it's everywhere. And then multiply that by countries and multiply that by millennia. Like, this is not new, and this is not unknown. But I keep using this word, like, somehow it's been siloed. And the church has had most of the language around it. They've been able to sort of respond to things at their will. And for me, I thought, like, my people are street fighters. Like, my sister's 16th birthday was a melee on our block. Like, and it's true, and it was terrifying, but that's how we solved problems. We took it to each other. And in this film, I said, like, I'm just, excuse my language, but fuck the church. And we are bringing this to the local. And people showed up. And I feel like when people from Baltimore, Annapolis, LA, which just settled for $860 jillion, whatever, like, they will recognize themselves in this film. That's my hope. That's like, and we're moving toward that. I'm sorry, I've not talked about this, and it's a real challenge, because these guys are with me. Forgive me.
And I think what you're experiencing here is what you'll experience in the film, in the way, and how vulnerable you are, which is such a gift to us as an audience, your vulnerability, which is also sort of what we're talking about today, and how we, as storytellers, can, you know, get past that sort of that invisible plane of the screen and actually connect with people. And I think that's what you do with your live performance, but I think that it is also incredibly effective for your documentary, because presumably people in the Czech Republic would not have gotten to see you do that live performance, but they got to see the film. And so that becomes an incredibly powerful way this medium can bring these stories to a larger audience. I do wonder, though, if you could speak a little bit to, now you've gotten to see the film with audiences, where you're presumably sitting in the audience, as opposed to performing this. How has that experience been? Has it been distancing or in something else?
You know, interestingly, so the last festival we were in Jihlava, which is in, not pronounced Jilava, but Jihlava in the Czech Republic, they screened on a streaming platform called DA Film. So it was globally available to people before it screened in person. And so interestingly, when I got to town, a few people kind of just approached us on the street, which was very out of body for me. Like, someone just said, oh, I loved your film. And it was the first time that it had been outside of the very small group of people in Philadelphia who had seen it. So there was a little bit of like, uh-oh, like this is, people see this. But then when we got into the screening, it was just so like answered prayer to be in community, because it was about community. Like it's about how do you speak to the unspeakable? And my answer is, like, I come from, my dad's the oldest of 12 kids, and everything we did in community. We shared food, we shared clothes, we shared everything. And to me, like, there is no other solution to almost anything. It's like, what happened when Homeboy won the election the other day? Like, we all got together. Like, my people just got together and we were like, what the, you know, like all the crazy, but it's the only salve. So it is as if, you know, there's in The Moth, the storytelling collective The Moth, there's this phrase about we're all holding hands under the table. And that is what it felt like. It felt like just people locking arms. And it was really, really, like, completely, I did not want this to be about my own personal healing. Like, that was not my thought or my stated goal. It was really about, like, bringing my community together and having a frank discussion about this thing that was ricocheting around and frankly killing people. And it was that. It was like very much an answered prayer. And it's hard to be centered here when in my mind the community is centered in these boys who have passed away. And, like, you know, I still think of them as boys. They were men when they passed, but these were boys. These were boys that carried this poison through their lives. And, you know, my friend who was a proper Buddhist rather than like a part-time Buddhist, but she called me up and she just said, medicine from poison. And so that's the feeling.
And I promise you will also laugh. It's also funny. He's an incredible, incredible performer.
Philly.
Yeah. So now that we're on to this topic of vulnerability and getting personal, I wonder if we could open it up to everyone. Because there's certainly varying degrees of vulnerability and getting personal in these various films, as you probably could tell just from this conversation. And I wonder, like, for each of you, where does that fit into your process in thinking about the personal, about getting vulnerable? And in particular, you know, the difference between telling your own story, like Gerad is doing, versus telling someone else's story. And how do you navigate that idea of getting personal?
Even if a film isn't about me personally, each of my films are so personal. And I think that each one of my films, if you look at In Football We Trust and The Judge and Belly of the Beast and What You'll Remember and now A Shot at History, they're pieces of my heart, pieces of my soul. You know, those are moments that I think vulnerability begets vulnerability, and they're very, you know, they're pieces of our lives. And I think in addressing a variety of different topics, whether that's forced sterilization inside women's prisons today, whether that's global sport capitalism, or whether it's A Shot at History, the story that you will see hopefully in a few minutes, it's all very intimate and character driven, and through character, through intimacy, through personal POV, you get to understand kind of the larger context, the larger fight, or the larger investigation, which ultimately, in the case of my films, creates impact. I make films for impact reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think I almost feel a little bit of imposter syndrome being at double exposure, where, you know, investigative filmmaking is part of the, you know, the backbone of what the festival is doing. I think I was really heartened that the film was programmed and that, you know, there's this panel to participate. But I think I'm always led by, first and foremost, you know, it's sort of wanting to center sort of an individual experience in a way that allows us to connect and know each other more deeply. That's bridging in some ways. That's helping you question and think about things differently, which I suppose there is a sort of internal investigation in all of the films that I've worked on. But I've been drawn to personal films. Like in my work as a producer, the last film that I produced was a personal film by the director. You know, in some ways it's a border story. It's about migration. It's about the sort of ripple effects of being part of a diaspora, but it was really, it was her family's story. So I think there's so many ways to get at larger social issues. For me, you know, documentary filmmaking, by virtue of being about the real world and about people, even if you're not, you know, coming in and being intentional about, I want to, you know, to have impact on this kind of thing that's going to shape policy, or I want to, you know, look into this specific thing that's going to have a call to action. I think that the sort of, the issues that kind of make up the fabric of who we are as human beings always kind of ripple to the top and kind of seep through. And, you know, I think that there's also power in kind of, you know, I'm working on a personal film right now that I'm directing, that I'm in, and I would love to have a separate conversation with you about what that, what that experience is like. But I also think in some ways, lending your own sort of intimacy and being able to be vulnerable with those who are participating in your films, because really it is a collaboration always. I think that that's what makes a film and the journey that you're going on with your participants successful. It's like there has to be this sort of mutual vulnerability, and I think I'm learning that even more as I'm starting to work on this personal film, just how scary and you know, how much bravery is required, I think, in terms of putting yourself in front of the camera. So yeah, I think the personal always undergirds everything. Yeah.
Yeah, anytime. I just really believe in this form, which I didn't really know that I believed so strongly in this form. And as I'm exposed to more documentary, and it's you know, I've always kind of watched the Spelling Bee movie, like, blew my mind. I thought that was amazing. There's a girl from just outside of Philly in that. But now when I you know, we just went to this festival and I would see 4 or 5 films a day, and it's completely energizing to me. Like, this is energizing to me in a way that this subject, which used to be so dense and so sort of in my body, like, weighted, this process of making it communal and of sharing this intimacy is electric to me. So in that sense, I just, like, I'm afraid that I am now going to just start telling everyone everything about everything. Like, you know, like, I can't wait until the next little story that I tell about the meal I make later, or, you know, like, just some, but it's magical because in those moments, I just find it to be transcendent. I just watched a film about a documentarian goes back to a community in the Ukraine that is push and pull on the front of Russia, and her parents are taking care of all the dogs that have been abandoned in this town. It was the most moving thing, and the family is fighting constantly, and the dad's a bastard, and the mom's gorgeous and magnificent, teaching piano over Zoom. But it's like, where does this, like, you couldn't write this story, right? You couldn't conjure it, but here it is, and it's consumable, and for that reason, that intimacy is the thing that I just keep sort of moth to flaming.
Yeah, that's all wonderful. I do teach a bit, and when I teach documentary filmmaking, the first thing I do is I make them put themselves on camera, so they know what that's like. That sort of sense of being exposed, and I always, you know, encourage them to start with character, right? Like, it doesn't matter what your topic is, what your issue is. If you don't have someone's story that we're following, we're not going to care. We could continue to talk all day. I want to make sure everyone gets to Erika's film, but we do have time for 1 or 2 questions if anyone wanted to ask a question of one of our panelists. Yeah, back there in the...
I'm wondering if you alter your production in any way in working with the subject to... Okay, thank you. First of all, these all seem like really terrific films, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. I'm wondering if you alter your production in any way to try and enhance or to be supportive of vulnerability. I'm working on my first documentary feature right now, and I found that I think the best interview I had was at the very end of a long shoot in France that we were just going for B-roll. We had 1 handheld camera instead of 3 cameras on tripods and lighting, and we didn't have our translator there, and it was just this amazingly moving exchange in broken English, broken French. And it was an accidental discovery on my part, but I'm wondering if you do things like that or other things to help make your subjects more comfortable.
I mean, I've definitely had that experience as well. I think sometimes it's really helpful to spend time before you turn the camera on, before the camera is out at all, just to be with one another, to talk with one another, to sort of develop a rapport, develop trust. I think that sometimes when it's like you show up and the first experience is okay, and now we're setting up the lighting for an interview, and it's the sort of formality of it. I mean, I know this from myself. As soon as I'm like, in the spotlight or something, you just communicate differently. I also think that there's been things sometimes where, as soon as the camera, you think the interview is over, people start saying all sorts of things. So I never actually cut when you're done, right? And then you start sort of having a back and forth about how that just went, and that sparks something else. And so I think that what you were noticing maybe in this last shoot where it was a little bit more informal, I do think that things that you do to create the feeling of, and now we are off the performance mode, can actually result in much more intimacy and authenticity.
Yeah, I found that every person works a little bit differently, and being able to pivot and kind of adjust. I'm an incredibly collaborative filmmaker, so I bring participants kind of into the filmmaking process, and we have multiple conversations about what is a comfortable environment, what are the boundaries of conversation, do we have an inner language when you don't want to tell someone else who's like behind the crew, or part of the larger crew that you don't have an established relationship with, that you want the camera off, or how to have those kind of code signs. And then, for example, in a shot at History, Nita was really behind the scenes with us crafting the story, like, okay, almost field producing. Like, I am going to be going back to India for the first time. I think this is an important moment in the story. And we talked about why, and we talked about, what we could potentially film there. And then eventually she handed off those contacts. But within each situation, we had talked about, okay, this is the first time that you're seeing X person or this location. How does that feel ahead of time? And things can change in the moment too. So I think it's really communication and collaboration. And sometimes I find that like a more formal structure sometimes gets different material, and like me just with a camera gets something completely different.
For me, I would just give all of that to the team that I worked with, my co-producer and co-director. He's a Brooklyn kid, but like the greatest and most circumspect collaborator. And we really, like early on, we just like, this is a full collaboration. Like, this is your part. This is my part. We're going to meet wherever we can to discuss things. But like, I provided access to most of the principals that were the subjects. Like, it was my mom and dad, my old buddies and their moms. And, like, I was in the homes that I ran around in when I was a kid. And my collaborator, Kaya Dillon, was so skilled in being, first of all, respectful and sensitive. And I think that's sort of unteachable. But it is, I think maybe you would agree, like, part of it is hanging out. Like, part of it is just being in your body, in a space with people, and, like, letting this machine that is the camera, that is, like, really taking up a lot of attention at times, to really, like, let people grow accustomed to that. And I think sometimes that's just time. You just have to be there, and you just have to, like, drink the tea and talk a bit. And then the other part is love. Like, you have to love these people. If you don't love these people, I think you're gonna feel it. And I started in that place, and like, I think he now, like, we're the two weepiest fucking guys you will ever see. Like, we talk together, and I'm like, oh my God, like, what's happening? And he's like, I don't know. Like, we just constantly are filled with the energy of this love that has been what the film is born on. And I think, to me, that's just the answer. Like, you gotta love your subjects, you gotta love your people that you're working with, and you gotta trust them. And if they don't trust you, you're in trouble.
It's beautiful. Or sometimes just turn on the camera and leave the room. That can work. That can work too. One more question before we walk over to the MLK library. Yeah, right there.
I'm so intrigued by this conversation, and I'm curious, in doing the personal, it comes with so much responsibility. I'm curious for your subjects if there were things that you wanted to protect them and not disclose, and if not, like, were there times where they were super combative or that you had to manage a person in terms of their expectations and how what they wanted from this and what you ultimately wanted to do?
I mean, I'll say for Mistress Dispeller, it was an incredibly challenging process in the edit to make sure that viewers would have empathy for all characters. I think that we found having, one extra little conversation or detail could really quickly turn you against the husband, or having, a couple of things that suddenly made the relationship between Fei, who was the mistress, and Mr. Lee, like, it suddenly felt very transactional. And it's really hard, you have so much power as a filmmaker to be editing and curating and choosing the experience that a viewer has and what their perception is, and in terms of what you're revealing or concealing. And so I think that there was a lot of feedback screenings, back and forth, subtle shifting, like, do we take this one line out, do we shift this here, to just ensure that you were with every character, even as you sort of saw their flaws, but that there's a real power in your editorial hand, and there's also just a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah, there's going off of the tremendous amount of responsibility, there are absolutely things that film participants have shared throughout the course of my career that do not make the film. And in the case of Belly of the Beast, one of my most recent films, actually one of my film participants was in seeing some footage, it was like an early assembly, was like, Erika, I can tell you're protecting me, and it's okay. Like, it's okay. You can go a little further. And that's the kind of relationship that I want to have, is no film participant can prepare themselves for what this is going to be like when people start seeing the film. There's no amount of preparation, no matter how much media training, how much conversation, how many times they've been in a film, how many, trainings they've watched. There's literally no amount of preparation that can prepare someone. So that's a big message I would love to have everyone take away, is just be very mindful about what the experience of a film participant might be when the film comes out. And so I'm extremely protective. And I think it is our role to anticipate what a response might be. And also there are certain things that are maybe very vulnerable and really like a great moment, but if it's not in service of the larger story, then there's no point in including that.
Yeah, I felt really compelled to, this is my jam. Like, these folks weren't seeking this out. No one wanted this conversation, which was kind of the role of the show. Like, I needed to have a container in which everything could be brought forth. But when we were shooting in the neighborhood, like the first day we showed up in my old neighborhood, the block association started buzzing around like, yo, there's a fucking film crew, like, it's that dude, and he's here, the kid from Facebook. And this is 20 years later, so like some woman came out on the porch, and I wasn't like dressed in my shirt or anything, and she was like, yo, are you the Fox Chase boy? And like, we're in Fox Chase. I'm like, yeah, you are too. Like, you're the Fox Chase girl. And then 20 minutes later, I'm holding her infant, and I didn't know her, and I have like a million cousins, she knows all my cousins, but I was like, this is not for this. Like, and because she didn't sign on for anything, and I didn't even want to ask her to sign a release because your baby's so cute and this would be great. I was just like, this isn't all this. Like, we have to manage ourselves within this context, because not everybody thinks documentary is as magical as I do. And that was the overriding thing. Like, my mom's there. We were in my grandmother's funeral, and I had just gotten into a scrap with the priest who was like rushing us to get started. And I was like, yo, man, this woman was a Eucharistic minister in this church for 20 years. We're not rushing. Like, we're not rushing. But that didn't make it, because I don't want that guy even hide nor hair of that guy in this film. Like, you do have to protect these things that you love. And I saw your glorious film last night, and that was what I was responding to when I spoke to you last night. Like, that guy is both amazing, and I really want to know him, and I'm also terrified. And there is a lot of protection that I think has to go around in that space.
Well, all of these films are amazing. Erika's film is playing in 17 minutes at the MLK Library, a short 16-minute walk from here. And we have Mr. Speller
8:30 tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. Definitely check that out. It's amazing. And Fox Chase Boy.
Sunday at 1:30.
I have to say, I'm just now clicking like Fox Chase Boy and Fox Chase Boy. I'm dense. So wonderful. Also, yeah, definitely check it out Sunday. And thanks very much to all of our panelists.